Now it's turn for Julie Hollis. That she should be connected, and I don't know if you can switch on her camera, microphone, maybe. Or otherwise, I'm asking her to do it. Yes, there she is.
Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Let me just try and.
I will sit.
Okay.
Sir, can you share your presentation, Julie?
Yeah, I'm just working on that. Right. Okay, how does that look? Let me just do that. Hopefully it's in the right mode. Is that right?
Yeah, it's working. It's working.
Very good.
So, thanks, Julie. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So my name is Julie Hollis. I'm the Secretary General of EuroGeoSurveys and also on the advisory board. And I
sorry, can you start the presentation, because we just see the main program.
Sorry. I see. 1 second. Here we go. Should be okay now, I think. All right. So I'm going to be talking about the role of EuroGeoSurveys in supporting the EU's ambition to boost domestic critical raw materials supply from secondary resources, including mining waste, or as a very short title, as opposed to that very long one, closing the loop, which I'll refer to a little later. So to begin with, who and what are the European Geological Surveys? Well, most of the European national geological surveys were set up over the past century, although some are much older. The British Geological Survey is 188 years old, and there are several that are more than 100 years old. And most of them were initially set up primarily to explore the mineral endowment of their national territories and to collect and archive and report data and knowledge of the geology to their respective governments, usually involving systematic geological mapping. Modern geological surveys have a much broader mandate. Most of those surveys are under government ministries or are research institutions, or both. And they have the role of gathering and archiving and delivering data to understand all aspects of the national surface and subsurface. So this includes mineral resources, but it also includes groundwater geological hazards such as landslides and earthquakes, and ground subsidence, geoenergy, such as geothermal, carbon capture and storage, geoheritage, subsea geology, open geology, and more. A long time ago, the European surveys began collaborating with each other, and in 1971, more than 50 years ago, they established EuroGeoSurveys, which is an association that is now based in Brussels, and which has evolved from sharing experience and expertise to an organization that has much larger ambitions. And before I explain a bit more about those larger ambitions, I would first like to show a 3-minute video about EuroGeoSurveys, and I'll hand back to Bruno to do that for me, please.
Yeah. Okay. So give me a second. Sharing your video. Sorry. I don't know where we were. Okay, so now you should have a control again.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like there are a little bit of technical issues. Sorry about that. But okay, so we are an association of 37 geological survey organizations of Europe, comprising more than 10,000 people. And the foundation of the collaboration between our members is through our expert groups and task forces, which cover thematic areas in which most of our member surveys are active. And this gives our members a lot of opportunity to share expertise and experience and to build collaborations, often partnering in European projects through those expert groups. Our mineral resources expert group is our largest, with 79 mineral resource experts from 35 countries. The goals of the organisation are first to carry out joint research with EU policy impact, and indeed several of our experts are also represented on Commission expert groups related to mineral resources, groundwater, soils and more. Second is to deliver harmonised pan-European geological data through our common data infrastructure, the European Geological Data Infrastructure, or EGDI. And third is to engage in outreach, capacity building and communication. As we have geoscientific research at our base, we published in 2021 a strategic research and innovation agenda, which provides the basis for our research goals and objectives and provides input to the Horizon Europe program for 2021 to 27. And we'll continue to revise our SRIA over the coming years, but the four main goals of the SRIA, which will likely not change, are resourcing Europe, which is focused largely on mineral resources and particularly critical raw materials, climate change and decarbonisation related to geoenergy and carbon capture, safety, security and well-being, which encompasses soil health, groundwater, urban geology and more, and Europe's digital twin, where we have a focus on our data infrastructure and building this also into a knowledge hub that draws on our expert network. You've heard me mention the EGDI, the European Geological Data Infrastructure, and really this is at the heart of the organisation. More than 10 years ago, there was a slowly growing realisation that the many EU-funded projects that EuroGeoSurveys and consortiums of our member organisations were involved in were generating a lot of valuable data, but the access to this was being lost when websites died and data sets stopped being maintained after projects finished because of lack of ongoing resources, people and money. That's when EuroGeoSurveys launched the EGDI Scope project to assess the feasibility of setting up a common data infrastructure that could house these data sets from the projects, but also from the member surveys data as well. And that would involve harmonization of these data sets to common standards so that we can deliver pan-European data that could be useful for EU-level policy and decision-making. For example, mineral deposit data, or also groundwater volumes and quality, or soil chemistry, and much more. And that work continued, but really got going under the GeoEra program, which covered 16 projects on minerals, energy, and groundwater, and the data infrastructure, EGDI. Now EGDI is fully operational with more than 800 data layers, and EuroGeoSurveys is moving into its next phase in our flagship project, the Geological Service for Europe. EuroGeoSurveys' overarching mission is to provide public earth science knowledge to support the EU's competitiveness, social well-being, environmental management, and international commitments. But our vision is to establish a common European geological knowledge base and a unified, sustainable geological service for Europe. This is what the Geological Service for Europe project is about. The project structure looks like this, closing loops again, with the geological data infrastructure at its core, and covering thematic areas including geological mapping and modelling, so developing common pan-European frameworks, coastal zone management, groundwater resources, geoenergy, which also includes carbon storage, and mineral raw materials. And as I mentioned, our focus for the data infrastructure now is to develop this into a knowledge infrastructure, making it more useful and used by a variety of users. Our mineral raw materials work package of the Geological Service for Europe project has three main objectives. The first is to reevaluate critical raw materials on and offshore, and to evaluate mining waste as potential secondary resources. And this is being done by building on data sets that we already have and that are already live. The second objective is to create an international centre of excellence for sustainable resource management. And the third is to promote the use of the UN framework classification and UN, the UNRMS, the UN resource management system. And our experts are the largest group of knowledgeable trained experts in UNFC. The impacts that we hope to achieve include contributing to increasing the domestic sourcing of primary and secondary critical raw materials, decreasing European dependence on imports, and contributing to the green transition. So why are we doing this? Well, this is likely well known to all of you, having probably seen figures like these. On the left is a graphic from the latest World Mining Data Report for 2023, showing that since 2000, Europe is the only continent where mineral production rates have decreased, and they've decreased by 31%. And on the right, the familiar view of Europe's dependency on a number of mineral commodities such as rare earth elements, cobalt, nickel, graphite, lithium, and also the massive ramp up in demand for these critical raw materials that is expected over the coming years as Europe decarbonizes. So why is EuroGeoSurveys working particularly with secondary CRMs? Well, secondary sources are a significant part of the solution to building resiliency in the critical raw material supply. Europe may not be a center of the mining industry now, but mining has been happening in Europe for thousands of years. And while there is no clear estimate of exactly how many abandoned old mine sites exist in Europe, there are certainly hundreds of thousands of them. In other words, they are potentially a large resource for a continent that has a big gap in domestic supply. Another important point which leads back to the title of my presentation again, is that they are the missing link in closing the loop of circularity. We've all seen diagrams like this focusing on longer use, reuse, repair, and recycling, but there is a missing arrow here where waste from the original production phase can be remined to produce additional product in the form of secondary resources. Secondary CRMs are also a key benchmark of the proposed CRM Act that has been tabled, and I'll refer to that again a little bit later. Addressing CRMs in mine waste is also an important component of remediation of old mine sites, and they provide us with an opportunity to try to improve public perception of mining, which will be an important aspect of trying to boost domestic production in a continent where the mining industry has shrunk considerably over the last decades. In terms of what and how EGS is working with secondary mineral resources, our focus is on the harmonisation of pan-European data to Inspire and other standards, and we have a long engagement in such projects, mainly dealing with primary resources. But in the FRAME project under the GEO-ERA program, so that was forecasting and assessing Europe's strategic raw materials needs, there was a concerted effort to acquire, centralise and harmonise this data, and also to begin looking at secondary mineral resources in mine waste, particularly focused on the potential for further production of critical raw materials. As I mentioned, we've now started on the Geological Service for Europe project, in which our mineral raw materials work package has a significant part focused on secondary critical raw material resources in mine waste. And that work will involve updating information on mining wastes and pilot studies to assess economic potential of critical raw materials recovery from mining wastes. It will improve data coverage and quality for secondary CRMs in Europe, and in collaboration with the FutureArm project, which I'll come to in a moment. Here's an example, some images kindly provided by Daniel Oliveira from some work being done by the Portuguese survey as part of the Geological Service for Europe project, in which aerial reconnaissance of abandoned mine dumps is being carried out using drones, for example, using LiDAR, generating orthophoto maps and digital surface models, carrying out software processing and also field observations and mapping, and calculating volumes, and at the same time sampling and characterizing the dumps using morphology and geochemistry, and estimating dilution factors to use to interpret the results and make calculations of mineral and element concentrations. I mentioned the synergy with the FutureArm project, which several of our member surveys are involved in, which will introduce a strategy, reporting structure and guidelines for raw materials use focusing on 6 waste streams, including mining waste. And the findings will assist in assessing waste stream recoverability and secondary and critical raw materials recycling. I also wanted to mention the Exploration Information System project, which is led by one of our members, the Geological Survey of Finland, which several of our other members are involved in, and which will develop new data analysis methods by applying artificial intelligence and machine learning to mineral prospectivity mapping. And the French Geological Survey will lead the work on the applicability of prospectivity mapping to mining wastes. And last but not least, several of our members are involved in the SART project, in which they provide the geological knowledge about old mine dumps that contain tetrahedrite and tennantite for use in the manufacture of thermoelectric devices. And this includes collecting relevant samples for the pilots. Finally, I would like to refer back to the proposed Critical Raw Materials Act, in which the Geological Surveys of Europe have been named as having quite significant roles in regard to contributing to building domestic supply through provision of new data to encourage exploration in Europe. But importantly, there's also a role for them in regard to secondary critical raw materials. In Article 26 of the Act, which is about recovery of CRMs from extractive waste, the Act states that member states shall establish a database of all closed waste facilities, something that we're already working on through the Geological Service for Europe project, and that the member states should conduct representative geochemical sampling. And where this shows potential for economically recoverable critical raw materials, they should conduct more detailed analysis. And again, this is something that we are already doing to some extent and is clearly a task that falls within the mandate of the national geological surveys, and that should be supported at EU level by EuroGeoSurveys to ensure collaboration and harmonisation of the data and knowledge. And with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thanks, Julie. I don't know if there are questions here, but we have a question already from remote. So, Fernando Oliveira, wonder why production of raw materials in Europe is steadily decreasing? Asia, lower market costs only?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure that that is a very significant part of the story. From discussions that I had, it seems that it's been a very easy option for Europe. There's been an easy supply up until now, and as you say, and of course Europe is one of the most popular, if not the most populated continent. It's rather crowded, and so it's there's much more pressure on conflicting land uses in Europe than, of course, in other continents.
There is a comment also from Sebastian Fleider. Also lower or ignore environmental constraints. That's a comment, maybe comment as well.
Indeed. Of course, that's not everywhere, but it certainly is in some places.
Any other questions from the audience? No, don't see question now. Yes, from remote. Then I think we can thank again Julie.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.